to have everyone come back. You know, you could carry with you whatever you're partaking of and come across to your place because there are tables and chairs and, you can do that. So, as was mentioned, we have a relevant session number 3, relevant by virtue of what went before. And this is avoiding fraud and corruption to transform businesses with benefit to society as a natural accruing factor, benefit. If one avoids fraud and corruption. So chairing this session, we have one a co-chairman, and we have the speakers and presenters who we would now like to invite to take their places on stage. So we'll start off by inviting the chairman to lead the way in a manner of speaking, Mr. Manil Jayasinghe, senior partner, Ernst & Young, and also serving as a council member with CMA Sri Lanka. With him, we hope to also have the co-chairman, Mr. Ruchira Pereira, also council member, CMA Sri Lanka.
The first of our speakers will be Ms. Nadishani Pereira, who is an attorney at law with a degree in law from the University of Colombo and a Master of Arts degree on Development Studies and Public Policy. She's also completed a postgraduate diploma in marketing, as well as one in management accounting from CMA. Prior to joining TISL, Ms. Pereira was involved with humanitarian, development, and advocacy-based non-governmental institutions. Thereafter, as an independent consultant, she's been involved with the development of national guidelines and national policies with state agencies, such as the National Child Protection Authority and the Sri Lanka Police. And she's focused very much on human rights causes. She's been the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka since January 2021, strengthening the presence and impact of TISL at these crucial times. She will be tackling the idea of preventing fraud and corruption and their cost to society.
Then we have another who is not a stranger in our community, although he is from India, Mr. A.N. Raman. He's an advisory council member with CMA Sri Lanka and also has served previously. Therefore, is a past president of SAFA. Expenditure control and affordable pricing to benefit consumers and therefore society. That's the subject that he will consider. He is a commerce graduate from the Vaishnav College of Chennai, a fellow of the JCWAI, an associate member of ICA India, and certainly a fellow member of CMA Sri Lanka, and very recently in May 2011 was conferred membership of CPA Australia. He's a member of the Technical Advisory Board of ICMA Sri Lanka, that's here. And he was also president of SAFA, as I've mentioned, in 2011. And he is an internationally acclaimed expert on cost management principles such as strategic cost management and value chain analysis and various activities and initiatives related to the aforementioned. And Mr. Raman has been redefining the cost and management principles or cost management principles in India, some initiatives being the first of its kind in the world.
Taking that idea of cost management forward, Mr. Mahendra Jayasekara will be speaking on cost efficiency and productivity and their role in transforming business. He is the managing director of 4 large companies listed on the Colombo Stock Exchange, as well as being the chairman of the CMA Sri Lanka Cost and Management Accounting Standards Board.
So we shall hand over proceedings to Manil, who will then, introduce the topic as it were, and proceed with inviting those people we have introduced by name.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure all of you all have enjoyed a scrumptious lunch, and I'm not necessarily sure this is the ideal time to be talking about fraud, since all are all satisfied and whatever it is. But anyway, the topic that we are sort of delivering now is avoiding fraud and corruption to transform businesses with benefit to society. This is, I think, a very apt topic at this junction, because if you look at Sri Lanka today, I believe we have all the necessary ingredients for fraud. I go by what I mean by the necessary ingredients. In the 70s, this gentleman called Mr. Donald Crossey developed a model. And based on this model, he said there are 3 ingredients generally for fraud to happen. Now, fraud and corruption is a slight variation, what is corruption and what is fraud. But basically, both, what it does is it takes resources out of a business or an entity for activities which does not benefit that entity. So, for fraud to take place, you really need 3 ingredients. These 3 ingredients are: you need to have either pressure or motive to commit this. Second, just because you have pressure and motive doesn't necessarily mean fraud takes place. Why? I might have pressure or motive. My motive may be, maybe I have lost my, say, a source of income, and I have an urgent need for money, right? Or my child is sick, and I have an urgent need for money. Now the motive is there, so I have to temporarily take some money if I can't borrow. But motive alone won't help. You need to have the opportunity as well to do it. So when there is motive and the opportunity. An opportunity is, if you take today in Sri Lanka, some time back I was at a hotel which I know, and the general manager was speaking to me and said, this was during the gas crisis. He said that, my supplier has now called and said they have got the gas stock and they can deliver. Sorry, they can't deliver because there was then a fuel crisis and transport was a problem. So he said, if you can come to my store or warehouse, I'll give you the gas. So this guy now, he had to run his hotel, he need the gas, so he somehow or other found a transportation mechanism and then went to this place. Now when he went there, this storekeeper or the gas supplier said, no, now, I can't give you the gas at the price that I agreed earlier. It's going to cost you a little bit more. Now this general manager was now in a serious fix. Why? Because how is he going to go back and say gas which costs, let's say, 3,000 rupees, now this fellow is asking for 4,000 rupees. He can't go and tell the company, I bought gas at 4,000, they will think this fellow has played out, right? So he said, no, look, I have to ensure that I follow certain principles. So you have to give me a receipt. If it's 4,000 rupees, you'll have to give me a receipt saying that I paid 4,000 rupees. Smart guy, he said, okay, I'll give you a receipt. So now he knows that if he puts 4,000 rupees, he might get landed with consumer authority or whoever it is. What this guy did was he backdated the receipt, put the right amount, charged an interest on that, and came to 4,000. Right? So he had a receipt for 4,000, anyway that's fine. So this got me thinking. Now what I mean by is opportunity. So we have the opportunity today, because now the systems and processes that we have, controls, all that is now out of the window. I have to have gas to run the business, I have to somehow or other run it at whatever price, but whatever price means you are in trouble. The honest fellow will actually pay the money. A fellow who is not so honest or who has a need, as I told you, motive, who has an incentive or motive, he will say, okay, I'm giving him 1,000 rupees, I will take 100 rupees or 200 rupees. So now so just because you have the motive doesn't necessarily mean you can create fraud, but you also have to have the opportunity. The third factor is we have people who justify doing the wrong thing. Say in today's context, people will say, cost of living has gone up so much, I can't live, the salary this fellow is giving is not enough, right? So it is okay if I take a little bit here and there. That's the rationalization. So these three ingredients generally has to be there for fraud to happen. And I believe today we have all three ingredients. So this guy also mentioned that 9 out of 10 have no prior history of fraud. He also mentioned 55% has no history of any workplace misconduct. He also mentioned that only about 13% have poor performance evaluation. So you can put this into context and see, most people who do fraud probably are honest people also. So he came up with this theory of 10-80-10. 10% of the people will never do a fraud, whatever the circumstances. Then there is another 10% who will find ways of doing fraud. 80% belong to that middle tier. And that 80% can easily be swayed with the right incentive or motive. So this is statistics got from National Association of State Audit and Competitiveness in the US, right? So this is the pattern. So today we are talking very interesting topics about fraud and corruption. So just keep this in mind. This is the environment in which we are doing. So sudden changes, today we have sudden changes. I believe in the last 2 months we have such tremendous changes. Inflation, lack of staff, whatever it is, right? Is created the environment. So I think this session is going to be very interesting. We have some very key people. I think funnily today's papers, I was just glancing through them and I found a big article about fraud and corruption. And in that, some interesting things that were put out is, I think, Transparency International said on the perception score, countries like Denmark, New York, New Zealand, Finland and all, score 1. Sri Lanka is in 102, right? But there are other countries also in this 100 bracket, like countries like Thailand are also in the 100 bracket. India is 85 and Malaysia 62. So I'm not in any way advocating that fraud is okay, but fraud does happen. Not that you can totally eliminate fraud and corruption, it does happen. I think the key is minimizing and also to ensure that when fraud takes place, it takes useful resources and puts in the hands of maybe not so useful people, right? So it is necessary for you to be effective and efficient and effective that you minimize this fraud and corruption so that assets that we put it has been put into productive use. So with that, we have today 3 eminent speakers. We have Nadishani Pereira, who will discuss about fraud and corruption in society, Executive Director of Transparency International. I'm sure she will bring some statistics for your benefit and deliberation. Mr. Raman, who is a very senior member and who has been associated with CMA a lot, he will sort of present to you expenditure control and affordable pricing to benefit consumers. So remember that most frauds and even corruption takes place in procurement. Procurement is the singly large place which I have found all sorts of frauds take place. And then finally, we have Mr. Mahendra Jayasekara, who will sort of deliberate on cost efficiencies and productivity for transforming business. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me hand over to, I think, Nadishani, who will make her presentation. And once the presentation is done, we will probably with a little bit of time, deliberate if you have any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity, and also thank you for coming back to your seat quickly, having to finish your lunch, and I hope this session will keep you awake. We're going to talk about something that became mainstream during the last couple of months in Sri Lanka with the Aragalaya and so forth. So let's just get into some details of it. The topic given to me today was prevention of fraud and corruption, a major cost to society. So let's just start with the basic definition of corruption. I will focus on corruption. That's my area of expertise here. And corruption, simply defined, is the abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. Entrusted power. We entrust a huge amount of power to the public representatives whom we send to parliament. We entrust a lot of power, our sovereignty, to the president, the executive, and then from there to the cabinet. They take magnificent decisions that affects our lives, our resources, the resources of this country that needs to be protected for generations. In a democracy, that's how it works. Now, this power that has been given to them is given for one and one purpose alone. That is to serve this country. It is for a purpose. It is not for their personal benefit. But if they abuse such power for their personal gain, there is corruption. And if you take a public official, yes, but even if you look at in a private capacity, in whatever role you play, you are given a power in your office, in your role, for a particular purpose. It is not for personal gain. So that is the basic definition. And so I just want to just show you this list again. Is not ending here, but some basic types of corruption, because we tend to think of bribery as the only form of bribery and perhaps commissions. But I want you to see that there are other forms of corruption, certain forms of corruption that has become cultural to us now. Like now, okay, you all know what is bribery, commissions, that's well known. You ask for a percentage. If you want that contract, you have to pay commissions. Fraud, embezzlement, you siphon out public funds or organizational funds using all sorts of fraudulent ways for your personal benefit. Misuse of public property, a critical issue in Sri Lanka. We are funding this public property. It is the tax money. It belongs to all of us, our children now and to be born. But what happens? Are these public properties being used for the benefit of the country, for the development, to give essential services to the citizens? Or are they being wasted? Wasted. Officers are there. Officials are there. Are they doing their job? Are the resources being used or wasted? And also used for personal benefits. So then, conflict of interest. It is a form of corruption. We cannot have our kith and kin, give contracts to our known friends. We cannot have known people employed. That is conflict of interest. The moment you have a conflict of interest, that's the end of accountability. And this is considered as normal also. To the extent it's tied up with the other three. Cronyism, having your friends and your gang, your people in all influential positions. So you get things done. It's a network. That's the end of that institution. And then nepotism, family, bringing your family into the picture. Even in a private organization, if you are running the organization, you're not supposed to be having your family members brought in, or your best friends or good friends brought in, because after that you won't hold that person accountable. That person cannot hold you accountable. That's the end of transparency as well. And then this happens, from the highest of governance to all levels. It's so normal for us to call an MP who is newly elected and say, look here, you know me, right? I'm so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. Can you get my so-and-so, so-and-so a job? And you think that's fine, as long as it's a job for your person. But that's the end of you're going against the system. You're going against the recruitment procedure. You're not getting the best people for the place, but known people. Known people, a huge problem. Culturally accepted when it benefits us. And then favoritism, favoring your people. You know, from school days, we know how destructive favoritism is. But then we let it happen in institution. What is sextortion? That's sexual bribery. There are other ways of asking for a bribery. It doesn't have to be cash. It can be in terms of sexual favors. It's a huge problem, not only in the public sector, in the private sector, all over. But women are often the main victims, and they do not want to talk about it because there is social stigmatization. You are having a stigma against the victim. You blame the victim, not the perpetrator. So then the woman is afraid to talk about, and they're also scared that they'll lose their job if they say that it may say their supervisor is demanding sexual favors. And then, of course, money laundering. Why do you launder money? That is basically making dirty money look like clean money. Dirty money can be the taxes that you're supposed to pay, but you're not paying, you're evading. It can be something you earn through unlawful occupation, like drugs or so forth. It can be money that you get through fraud and corruption. So I can go on like that. Then just to show you, corruption is now like a cancer. And it's spreading all over, all structures. There is no sector, no structure, no institution that has escaped this. And it is a vicious cycle, sadly. Can you see here? The citizens end up having to pay higher prices because the entrepreneurs will add the corruption cost to that. And entrepreneurs are having to pay bribery to the public officials, then to the politicians, then the bureaucrats are taking bribes, then they might have to give bribes to the politicians, and the citizens, votes are being bought, and it's a vicious cycle. Now this cycle has to be broken, but not just by one party. And then, the important question, even the topic today, what is the cost of corruption? And I think this answer we saw in our country this year, where we fell into a begging nation. We are on our knees now still trying to breathe. We all felt it. Finally, not just the really, really poor people who always have been feeling it, but we all felt it. We were so inconvenienced. Businesses are struggling, our day-to-day lives. Why am I connecting the current crisis with corruption? We'll talk about it more. But the cost of corruption is huge. Corruption will stop a nation from thriving, from developing. Corruption affects hugely those who are at the bottom end of society, who are vulnerable, but also it affects the growth. It affects democracy. It affects the entire governance structure. We'll go into details as we proceed. Just give you a few statistics. This is global. So first we'll just look at the global cost of corruption. Annually, $1 trillion worth bribes are taken worldwide, says the World Bank. 7.5% of World Bank aid is lost due to corruption. Can you imagine the amount even? And this aid is given to poor nations, to people who need it. Sometimes they have no food, nothing, they are dying. But somebody is stealing from that. Curbing corruption could generate about $1 trillion in tax revenues annually across the world. That is the level of evasion of tax. And then, at least 5% of the world's gross domestic production is lost due to corruption. A huge loss. We will have some people taking this money. It's a loss to the country, it's a loss to the world. World Economic Forum says that. Now let's look at a few statistics from Sri Lanka. Now, the hardest thing to do, and as TISL, we are in this sector, and people often ask, how much did we lose from corruption? If it was that much easy to give you a number, then it won't be corruption, because the whole thing is it's done undercover. And there are so many aspects to corruption, not just the money value, right? So it's very difficult to get numbers. There are some numbers that have come out of audits and other inquiries, etc., that are published. These are the numbers I'm presenting to you. The very famous sugar scam that happened last year, the amount estimated was 19.5 billion rupees. Now look at these figures in the light of the crisis we are in, right? Some people have made us lose 19.5 billion. Airbus scandal, a little before it became famous, the approximate loss is 23 billion rupees. Gindilwala diversion project, another problematic project, lost 4 billion rupees. Fertilizer issue, approximately 1.4 billion as compensation to the Chinese organic fertilizer supplier, and approximately 509 million rupees for purchasing nano-nitrogen liquid fertilizer from the Indian supplier at a higher price. Garlic scam, there was a garlic scam also, and over 17.9 million. By the way, has anybody been held accountable here? Has anybody been taken to court or, so that is something to think about. And again, there is an organization called Global Financial Integrity based in Washington. They try to calculate monies lost through money laundering across the shores, across the countries. And these are some figures they've said about Sri Lanka, us. Corrupt individuals, including politicians and businessmen, criminals, and tax evaders, have moved US dollars 19.96 billion, or like 2.88 trillion, in dirty money out of Sri Lanka between 2004 and 2013. So the statistics they have put out is during this period. We can't actually imagine that amount, right? So this is our money that has gone out, stolen and taken out of this country into some offshore accounts and assets. Sri Lanka's illicit money outflows are worse than some of the notorious drug havens like Colombia. And also it's actually several millions less than that of Panama. This includes, now, when they are talking about what are the kind of corruption that's included in these money outflows. It includes over-invoicing or under-invoicing to evade tax. There is so much fraud around tax in this country. Suspect trade invoicing, where prices, quantity, quality are deliberately manipulated on goods and services. It's a major source of money that is then put to account away from the country. This happens now, we're talking about business sector. Of course, colluding with the politicians and public officials. And then, if I am to explain the different types of cost of corruption or the impact of corruption, I would say firstly, it prevents the needy, vulnerable, the poorer people from accessing essential basic services. Not talking about luxury. We're talking about food, water. Like, why do we still have places in Sri Lanka where they don't have water? There's no water. Now, all these years, all these public officials, all these institutions, all this tax money, all these development projects, we still don't have water in villages. Why some people have to go to school on a danda and then you see latest incidents, right? Why there isn't an access road? Because we hear people having projects and development projects in all of the rest, Pradesh Sabha, all these places that are supposed to address these issues. Why do you think? What has happened? So it affects these people. For them, it's their life. Imagine your home without water. And then this leads to some citizens, which means they don't have access to basic services, means their human rights are violated. Now I'm connecting to a discussion that happened recently at the UN Human Rights Council sessions. You would have seen on news where Sri Lanka was accused of economic crimes against people. They connected this fraud and corruption or economic crimes, stealing money, to the violation of human rights. And that is what I'm briefly explaining to you. Because access to water, access to food, access to housing, health, education, you know how poor some schools are, right? And these are rights, and these rights are lost. And they are lost because somebody is being corrupt. The governments and those who are supposed to give those services are not giving. These are preventable things. It's not like a not preventable massive earthquake or something, right? And then, so overall, the more corrupt a country, that country's socio-economic overall development of the people will be limited. It will stagnate. Because if you don't have proper health, education, food, I mean, how are you going to think at the next level? And your development projects are not progressing. So this is what. And then if you move, it creates a massive trust deficit between citizens and their government, citizens and their public representatives, the parliament, citizens and public officials. Now when citizens don't trust the same people they voted for, how can democracy work? Because the whole point is we rule by the people. So in effect, when we elect a parliament, we are saying that parliament represents our will. We voted. They are going to now run this country for the way we like. But is that what has happened? Is that why we had the struggle? No, people felt, no, it's not happening. In fact, the opposite is happening. So the whole point of democracy is lost there, right? And when you don't trust your public officials, when you say, those people are very corrupt, you can't, the country can't run. Whom are you going to trust? Can we live without the public service? We cannot, whether we like it or not. So this is the problem. And we are the ones who are paying these salaries anyway. So the country will be in crisis. And look at businesses. What's the cost to business? It will increase your cost, right? When you have to pay a bribe here, bribe there, commission here, you cannot be cost effective. I think the other panelists will go into those technical side of it. But imagine you're an entrepreneur, a SME, small and medium enterprise. You're just trying to, and you have a big market. You need to be competitive. But when you had to pay or bear the cost of corruption, how can you? I mean, how many entrepreneurs would have got discouraged or would have gone into losses because of our system errors? Because the system made it so difficult for them to do things the right way. And because of the way corruption has enabled monopolies, oligopolies to be created, few people are running the entire market. Others are not allowed to enter. Now you know what I'm talking about. This is all corruption. And then an entire sector is suffering. And I'll come to our analysis at TISL. Of course, we put this out as press releases and all that, about what led to the economic crisis from an anti-corruption point of view. I think it's important as professionals, educated people, influential people in society that you also understand this, discuss this. Structural weakening of accountability frameworks in governance. It might sound a little technical, but what do I mean here? Accountability framework in governance. That means how do you bring accountability in the way the country is run? So now this comes through a constitution. Executive, legislature, judiciary, there has to be checks and balances. Nobody here should be given tremendous power. Nobody's checking. That's not going to work. Power corrupts. That's natural. It's human. If you give a lot of power and nobody's checking on you, nobody can ask questions, you are not required to be transparent, you will automatically become corrupt. So for example, the 20th Amendment is the classic example of this. You are changing the Constitution for whom? For whom? I mean, we have a track record for a country that has changed the Constitution so many times. But if you look at each constitutional amendments, there are a majority that have not been done in the best interest of people. It has benefited a few corrupt people. It took away, it's like a shameful amendment. It took away any checks and balances that we had, right? So we are structurally doing that. And then we are raising our hand, voting for that, and people are then voting for them, right? And then people can really easily be corrupt because structurally you are enabling corruption. Lack of parliamentary oversight on public finance is critical. We understand this and it's critical we advocate for this. Why do we have a parliament? Why are we paying salaries and keeping them? They have two main duties. Two, not to give jobs to your friends or, not to be going to a funeral and, that party. The main two roles of the parliamentarians, one is to provide oversight on public finance. How the finances in the country operate, the parliamentarians need to go through and approve, ask questions, debate. There cannot be major projects approved without parliamentarians seeing it. Now that's what's happening now. The cabinet is given so much power and some even laws are brought, decisions, huge projects for 20, 100 years are signed, but the parliament has not even seen it. Or do they even read when we give them a document? Right? So then there is no oversight on public finance. And then the few institutions you have brought in, like the COPE committee, the COPA committee, they are doing some work. They are finding out lot of corruption. And then structurally, what do? They have to report back to the parliament. So they are saying these ministries, these officials are corrupt and telling back to the parliament. Beyond that, they are not empowered to do anything. So parliament can decide, oh really? Okay, that's it. Close the book, put it into the drawer, and that's the end. So that's why we have been giving, and many parties, a lot of proposals on how to give teeth to these select committees so that they can actually, together with AG, file action. We have all these crimes. Corruption is a crime. You will go to jail. But, if nobody is taking action, it becomes a joke, all these committees and all the resources on it. Political interference within the public sector, I don't need to say, you know how it is. You know how appointments are done shamefully. That's why we have 5 million around. Public officials, way too much of what we need to have. Because with each election, all these institutions are getting calls and so a big number of people are sent or graduates are sent. No process, no finding out what is needed, right? And after that also, throughout you interfere. Structurally, constitutionally, we have proposed to disengage the public sector from the politicians and to empower the Public Service Commission. Abuse of state-owned enterprises. We have over 500 SOEs, but only about 55 are giving any form of records. What happens to the other 450? You will see, big, nice buildings coming up, some name, they're supposed to be doing something, but nobody knows. Sometimes like a family business. But it's SOEs, our funds. Huge losses, but they are given big salaries, no accounts, no reports. You can't find any information. So it's a huge plot where we are losing public funds. A lot of corruption is happening through state-owned enterprises. Misuse and mismanagement of public resources on a large scale. From stealing the photocopy paper to stealing massive amount of public funds given to build a bridge to a poor village, to give health sector essentials, to medicine, to the amount. Like, have you heard how they play around with procurement, like Mr. Manil was saying? Right, the procurement, huge praise. Yeah, they play around. And then you lose a lot of money when you could have actually used that money to get more medicine, save more lives. Manipulation of public procurement procedure is a huge problem. We don't even have a proper law. We have national guidelines on procurement, which is also not really followed. And most of the critical billion-dollar procurements happen through unsolicited proposals. Right? Basically you never had a project, you never called for it. Some parties coming with a grand proposal. Now there is a procedure we are supposed to follow. But is it followed is the question. When unsolicited proposals come, there is no consistency in the way the procurement guidelines are used in this country. The procurement commission, we had a procurement commission, then 20th Amendment removed it. Again, there's no point having commissions if you don't give them the resources and the power and the independence they need to do their job. So if it starts with the appointments, to have good people in independent commissions, you need to have an independent constitutional council that will appoint independent commissions. So now with the latest amendment that has come with the constitution, the very latest one, which will come into effect I think next week, it's what happened. Yes, it does take away 20th Amendment, it does bring back this, but it is a diluted form of a constitutional council where the ruling fraction will still have a majority in the constitutional council, and it's less than even what we had in the 19th Amendment. So those are big topics to go into. I'll go through this. Manipulation of, I'd say that. Then cronyism and nepotism in governance. I think we have become an example. If you even Google and see nepotism in governance, you might get stories about Sri Lanka. That much we become notorious for nepotism in governance. Support, and we are very proud, right? As voters, I think we can't always blame politicians. We are very proud to vote for the son, the father, then the widow, then the son, because I think we have this imperial, we were under kings, right? And we thought that was good, we're proud. So that's how kings will, right? They will get their son to come. So but we have forgotten this is a democracy. Sometimes you have to break from this culture. We say all these big things, but at the end of the day, we have this conversation with citizens. At the end of the day, when you have to go and vote, what are you looking for? My race, my religion, my school, my social class, all the integrity, clean politics, all of that is out of the window. Will that person get my job done? So that's the thing, we can't always blame the politicians. Support of professional gatekeepers towards grand corruption. Who are the professional gatekeepers? Accountants, lawyers, auditors, real estate owners, real estate agents, Without the support of accountants, lawyers, auditors, these guys, money cannot be laundered. Money laundering and this corruption happens with the support of these professionals. That is the sad truth, not just in Sri Lanka, around the world. That's why we call them, they are professional enablers of corruption. They enable corruption. And it's a shame for the profession. It's a shame, but it happens. Maybe people will have a justification, maybe, but imagine the impact. You're enabling corruption, you're enabling the robbing of a nation, robbing of human rights, right? So siphoning away of public funds, generating illicit financial transactions. This is what I was covering. And then I'm going to show you a slide which might sound a little controversial. This is our analysis within the anti-corruption theory, right? In Sri Lanka, not just this last government, since independence, we've been building up a group of kleptocrats. We are suffering with kleptocracy. Basically, it means a bunch of thieves, basically. Like a group. This group is well connected. They will have politicians, public officials, businessmen, sometimes some underworld guy or two to protect them, and such people, and they work as a very united group. They have one purpose, that is corruption, and they are very powerful. Now, kleptocracy is a problem around the world. If you just Google, you can read about it. It's a huge problem because once we allow a country to groom and get this kleptocracy to bloom, it's very difficult to get rid of them. And then what has happened? A worse form of corruption in a country. A sad, difficult situation is if a country goes into state capture. You decide whether we are in state capture. When I say what it is, it's when a country's laws, policies are changed for the benefit of few people. They are so powerful, the corrupt people, often the kleptocrats, that they can even bring laws, change laws, bring a policy, change. Like a law is something you should do after a huge process for the entire country. But they are doing it to help their friends, to help themselves, for corruption. And you will see in a captured state that you citizens feel very helpless because you have no place to go. You will feel that the executive is corrupt, the parliament is corrupt, and they're helping each other. Then you go to the judiciary, you're not so sure. That's one place where change can happen, right? But then there might be interference there also. You feel stuck because where do you break the cycle? Because those who are corrupt are the ones who have the power across the sectors. Are we in this situation? So, it doesn't make sense for me to only talk about the problem without talking about solution and hope. As Transparency International Sri Lanka, we are a group, we are just 35 of us, but we operate with a lot of hope. People actually laugh sometimes when they find out where I work. And when I say I'm working towards fighting corruption in Sri Lanka, like, that cannot happen, right? And they have laughed. I said, no, but I believe we can, slowly, small milestones. It's a long journey, but somebody has to keep fighting. So, time, yeah, okay. So, basically, my time's up. So, this is to give you hope. So, if we are to combat corruption, there are two things to prevent corruption from happening, stop ongoing corruption. One thing key, infuse transparency and accountability to all these structures. From your office to governance, if there is transparency, that means people can see what you are doing, people can see your decisions, people can question you, right? If you can't act in secret, no, if you have structures and mechanisms where you have to give reasons for your decisions, you have to give information, you don't have to wait till a right to information request is filed. So, and accountability, you cannot say, I don't remember, not me, her. If you're a head, you take responsibility. You have to answer. You can't say, I'm sorry, I can't remember. Those kind of excuses should not be accepted. And then, my last two slides, I'll very quickly go through it because this is my earnest appeal to you, right? As a professional body, there's a huge role you can play. As CMA, as an entity, it is important to take a firm stance against corruption institutionally. Adopt an anti-corruption policy. Require that your members uphold certain ethical standards, which includes anti-corruption. And if they are found to be engaged in corruption, there has to be some action. Otherwise, there's no incentive, right? As then, you are all leaders. Whether you head an institution or not, everybody can be a leader wherever they are. Where you start, you set the tone. And setting the tone from the top. Like, we don't have good leaders, in this country, but because there's a huge role for the leader to do. You lead by example, adopt a zero tolerance policy for corruption in your institution, or advocate. We always tolerate. We have great tolerance limit for corruption from the day we are born. No, but is there any single institution that says zero tolerance? That means if you are found, termination, right? Or supplier, stop, right? Can we go there? Commit to refrain from engaging in collusive corruption. I mean, obviously, right? That means collusive means not somebody forcing you to play, but you're planning to get that contract by corrupt means and you're helping your office. Expose and take action against corruption when you see it, please. I mean, you can't expect only TIS, and we're just tiny organization. You can't expect few other NGOs or CSOs to do it. Everybody will have to take action against corruption. And we know now that we can't say, it doesn't affect me. It will affect all of us. It affected all of us. It continues to affect all of us. Not everybody can run away to another country. We had to live in this country. And if so, we had to save the country. Form integrity pacts with other entities like yours, with other businesses. Now this has worked, if you take even Thailand, Indonesia, African region, where you come together, other organizations, and you say, we will say no to systemic corruption. All of us have to go and get license from that public entity, and they're always asking for bribes. All of us will say no. Because if one party says no and other party gives a bribe, they get the license, no? You don't get. Can't work, no, in business. Integrity pacts is where you come together to resist corruption. And last one is use the right to information, ask questions. Let's not be like sleeping people. When you see corruption in your locality, in projects are being questioned, just file RTIs. It does amazing things. If you just ask them, give us the details, cost breakdown, tell us what happened to that project, sometimes the work is done. Because they can't answer, no, if there's corruption, either they have to give the answer, otherwise they have to do the job. Last, be active and civic conscious citizens and contribute and advocate towards the system socio-cultural change that is required to eradicate corruption. The system change we fought, we asked during Aragalaya, everybody has a role to play, and you are a powerful voice as a professional organization. Join that work, contribute, at least participate in those efforts. That will make a huge impact. So thank you so much. Sorry, I went a little over time. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadishani. I think our next speaker, Mr. Raman, will talk to you about cost and how to control expenditure through cost control and affordable pricing. So I'll invite Mr. Raman.
I was breathing over the shoulders of Manil in order to save time. Sorry about that, Manil. Good afternoon, President Professor Lakshman Vatawala, my good friend, President of South Asian Federation of Accountants, Hennayaga Bandara, and all other esteemed friends on the dais and in the audience. I am extremely joyful on today's occasion. One good reason is that most of them on the dais, almost every one of them are very good friends of mine, including Nadisha ma'am, whom I heard just now. Whether it is Chairman Manil or Ruchira Pereira or Mahendra, and why Arun Bandara Nayaga, who is the master of ceremonies. Including every one of them, I know them by name and face, and that is a familiarity given by Professor Lakshman for me. Every year, though I stay in India, he makes it a point, except during the COVID period, he gives me an opportunity and invites me every year to come here and share some of the very exciting thoughts which are happening in the field of cost and management accounting. This year also it's so. I am extremely thankful, Lakshman, for this wonderful topic. In fact, I am all appreciation for this brilliant topic which has been thought out, expenditure control and affordable pricing in the interests of consumers and society. So now, if you look at this topic, it can be broken into two parts. One is the expenditure control part for the societal benefits, and the second part is the affordable pricing for consumers. Please, the audience, split the topic into these two parts so that at the end of my presentation, there are some takeaways for you. How do I place these topics in what context? Expenditure control for the societal benefits can be placed in the context of the governments like the current government of Sri Lanka or any other government which runs to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for overcoming certain benefits. Every country evolving passes through this sort of critical phase. In those times, while IMF gives money, grants, loans, and it tells these economies to tighten some of the framework and mechanisms. So the word expenditure control, the phrase expenditure control, please remember, is in the context of IMF insisting on the Sri Lankan government that you guys tighten up these areas. So I have some points on that as takeaways for you. The second is affordable pricing. It's good to say subsidies should be controlled. Subsidies should not be there. The consumers should pay for that. That is fine. But in South Asian economies like that of ours, let us also appreciate there is a huge segment of the population which are in the low income group. They cannot, for example, afford the same level of, let's say, the price to be paid for an open heart surgery or a non-invasive medical benefit, but still they should be given the same technology level. They can't afford a very high price which a high income group, HIG, can do. This is where the concept of affordable pricing comes in, where the government plays a role. So whatever I am going to say need to be understood in that context. That is expenditure control in the context of IMF giving grant for Sri Lanka, and affordable pricing is to take care of those sustainable, those parts of the society whose incomes and livelihoods have not come up, but yet they need to be given a good and reasonable care at affordable prices. So how I have dealt with, for those for whom I am not able to reach out to the thoughts in a span of this 20 odd minutes, please you can take note of the sources from which I have picked up the information to be shared with you. Number one, there is something called an expenditure control framework. What are all the key features of such a framework? What are all the stages of a good expenditure control, and who are the actors who within the government framework, a sovereign government like Sri Lanka, within that framework, who are all the actors who need to take part in an expenditure control framework? This particular document released by the fiscal department of IMF is of a great value to us. I would suggest that the secretariat of our institute has a copy of this and reads it thoroughly, so that at any point of time we can support the government for strengthening the expenditure control framework. The second document is, there is an excellent document issued by the International Federation of Accountants on the perspectives of cost accounting for governments. The third important document, the materials which come from, there is something called a cost accounts office, which has been created under the Ministry of Finance in the Government of India, which performs a fantastic control in balancing the affordable pricing and the expenditure control functions of the government. Some good inputs have been made available from that. The next important document which one can refer to is the price setting framework of the one of the the provincial government of Australia. And last but not the least, a very important pricing document issued by WHO, the World Health Organization, along with OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. These documents give us a plethora of information how to look at the concepts of expenditure control and affordable pricing. So what I am going to do in the next 18 minutes or so, split the topics in these two parts, look at the expenditure control part and tell you some of the key features of the framework which are very relevant for a Sri Lankan economy or an economy like us passing this phase. And secondly, some of the snippets on affordable pricing models, what NGOs and governments are doing in this regard. So these are the two segments in which I rest assured the audience that you will certainly have some takeaways. So let me start with the the expenditure control part. Please look at this description of what this document issued by the fiscal department of IMF says. If there is a lack of effective expenditure control framework in any government, it will not only threaten the macroeconomic stability and the fiscal discipline, but it can also bring into question the integrity of the public financial management system and undermine trust in a government's stewardship of the national resources, that is of the public resources, I need not add more words in explaining or describing as to why an expenditure control framework is important more than what has been said in this particular document. But what is very important and interesting is if you see the bottom part of this slide, it goes on to give some statistics, and particularly from the South Asian economies, it says 60% of the countries in the South Asian region are very weak in expenditure control system. This is where we need to take a clue. If at all IMF has given substantial support for Sri Lankan government, please remember that in this crisis situation where we are going to rebuild the nation, we would have definitely promised an improvement in the expenditure control framework. And that is how I am sure Professor Lakshman Vatawala has made this particular part as a theme as a part of this particular topic. Now, if you go into this particular framework, this expenditure control framework, just for your information, I am giving some of the key features. I can't go into the document completely in this 15 minutes or 16 minutes or so. A typical expenditure control framework in the government, this particular document says, should pass through 7 phases. If any of these 7 phases is weak, if any of the desirable features are not there, then there is tremendous scope for improving that. And they are, number 1, the authorization. The first phase, it starts with authorization of an expenditure. Second, when the expenditure is over different time periods, how to apportion that expenditure over different time periods or different time zones and the fixing of the limits for that. The third phase, within that expenditure set for a particular budget or a program, reservation of limits, the third important phase in the expenditure control framework. The fourth important phase is commitment of liabilities. I might not have spent, but I may commit for a liability with the hope that the government may think it will pay later in the next fiscal year. So commitment of liability has also been brought into this framework. The fifth is verification or certification before you release payments, where typically the audit controls and other controls, internal controls come in, initiating the payment order, and last but not the payment phase. These 7 stages, this document gives out excellent dimensions of what are a standard operating procedure in each of this phase. Now what I am going to do is, I am a very strong cost and management accountant. Someone jocularly said, Mr. Raman, if your blood is tested for group, it would not be O group, O positive or O negative. The blood group will form in the category of CMA. That is how I am dedicated for this particular subject. So being a very strong CMA professional, what I am going to do in the next slide is pick up 1 or 2 of these stages and relate how the cost and management accounting is very strongly related to these stages. That means when the government we are going to ask to strengthen these 7 phases, there is a tremendous scope of telling the government that the cost and management accounting can play a very major role in these 2 areas, which are all the minimum required for such a strengthening. Number 1 is, if you look at the left side of the screen, at the authorization, the initial authorization phase itself, when the government includes or embeds a program for spending in its annual budget, at that stage itself, lot of evaluation has to take place. That evaluation should be in the form of what is the outflow that is going to happen, where are going to be the benefits, the outcome or the outputs, document those outcomes or outputs vis-a-vis the expenditure. This process should have gone very thoroughly in the authorization phase. And this is exactly where the cost and management accounting brings in a concept called activity-based budgeting or zero-based budgeting as it is called, which was started maybe 2 or 3 decades back, much before it started from the United States Budget Office. Other examples in the world which has very strongly implemented the concept or the tool of activity-based costing or activity-based budgeting or zero-based budgeting in that authorization initial phase? Yes, very much. Governments, Canadian, we were so much interactive with the Canadian Acting High Commissioner yesterday. In Canada, CMA Canada itself has published lots of documents as to how the provincial governments in Canada have introduced the concept of activity-based budgeting, which is a very important CMA tool in this expenditure framework of the provincial governments. This is one concrete example which we can tell the Sri Lankan government that this is how this particular phase in one of the 7 stages can be strengthened. Yet another example is when I exercise accounting control at the end of a document, we need to come out with a strong tool of evaluation, a CMA tool of evaluation called social cost benefit analysis. The social cost benefit analysis has become a very important CMA tool over a period of time, particularly emanating from our region. One solid example which I can quote from my country, India, in application of this tool is whenever the government makes for example, the Tamil Nadu province government, whenever they make their annual budgeting, there is a huge budget for spending money on the noon meal scheme for the children. Crores and crores or millions of money are spent on that. They have to very clearly bring in an evaluation of the last year, how much was the money spent, that is expenditure, vis-a-vis the output and the outcomes. So a social cost benefit analysis takes place as a CMA tool in the government as a part of the accounting control as to how this particular expenditure made out from the public funds as a part of the program of the government has benefited the society, what were the outputs and what were the outcomes. Now, these 2 examples, one from Canada and one from India, solidly connect the CMA tools into 2 of the 7 stages of the expenditure control framework, which I just now talked to you. So this means there is a very perfect and a direct alignment of the cost and management accounting profession with the 7 stages of the expenditure control framework issued by IMF. Coming to the last but one part of this first topic, some of the key important suggestions given by this particular IMF framework on this expenditure control. I am not going to take you through the complete all of them, but some of the key recommendations for the economies which are weak in that. We can see the first part itself. Governments strengthening this framework are expected to evaluate what are all the specific tools which can be used in strengthening the weak parts of the current expenditure control system. That means a weakness analysis of the current systems will have to be compulsorily made, and required tools of CMA or any other accounting tool need to be linked where I can really strengthen. Second, upgrading and improving the financial management information, public financial management information systems. So here, Professor wanted me to quote a very important practice made in India, which has been very recently become very popular and also connected with what Girish Ramachandran said yesterday in the form of a digital spine. Every one of us, the taxpayers in India, as well as the citizen, will have a unique digital identity number. He is a DigiCen. Now, my taxpayer position, tax payment number is connected with this digital number and stored in the master of the Finance Ministry or the Inland Revenue Ministry of the government. Suppose I am not so, but suppose I am a bad citizen trying to generate black money and trying to deprive the government of the revenue, or provincial government of the revenue. I purchase land out of my corrupt money in some weak parts of the state, and this transaction would try to escape the net of the government. It was all possible earlier. With this digital spine, do you know what happens? When I purchase the land, that land purchase cannot be done offline. Compulsorily, it has to be done online. The unique identity number, that a DigiCen number, gets connected with a taxpayer number automatically in the panchayat or a local area where the registration of the land purchase has to be done. This message is stored in the master, and when I file my income tax returns, automatically I am shown the mirror. This is the net income, which taxable income you have filed. These are all the investments made by you. It could be in land, it could be in jewelry, even jewelry is included. It could be a very, very high imported vehicle. If those transactions are related with this return, it automatically comes before the assessing officer, and unless you have proper explanation, your returns will come into terrific scrutiny. So this is how the digital spine has been used to connect the public financial management system, and thereby a fantastic net has been created in the country the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, thereby strengthening the income as well as the expenditure management, expenditure control system of most of the provinces in the country. These are all some of the key suggestions, and I wind up in this slide by saying one of the important suggestions is the costing methodologies in arriving at the budgets for specific programs is one of the key recommendations made by the fiscal department of IMF. So Professor Lakshman Vatawala right royally can refer to this document and tell the Sri Lankan government that these are all the areas where you need the strengthening of the expenditure control systems of the country. Now, before I go to the second topic, some of you may be interested to know, are there other global practices what Mr. Raman is talking about? Are there countries which have done this? The answer is yes. Some of the very important countries which have gone through this expenditure control framework of 7 stages and have done phenomenal work is, one is France and another is Germany. Germany in particular has taken the cost accounting route of strengthening the expenditure control framework, and France has taken another route. In United States, specifically, there is an Office of Cost and Budget under the President in the federal government, which goes through all the procurement and purchases beyond the cutoff limit made by the federal government, and unless they give the stamp of approval in terms of the benefits for the economy, it cannot go through as an expenditure. That is how the expenditure control prevails in US. In India also, there is a secretary level appointment called the Chief Cost Accounts Officer to the Government of India, who performs these roles under the Finance Ministry and goes through all the documents which require a high outlay. For example, you might have read about that French jet purchase Rafale made by the Narendra Modi government came in for very heavy criticism under the opposition fire over that political slugfest. But in that, because it went through the scan of the Chief Cost Accounts Officer of this particular finance ministry, very professional arguments were placed for this jet purchase. So these are all some of the important practices which are globally available on this. So now I move to the second important topic for the last 4 minutes. And in this topic talks about this quote, you may not be able to read, perhaps it's too small font. It talks about how an affordable price setting mechanism is very important. This quote comes from the OECD and the World Health Organization, which says the pricing should reflect the economical spend. So it's not as if I have got so many number of people, whether it is an electricity board or whether it is a telecom or any other sector, I have got so many people, I compute my cost and then recover by. No, it's not that way. What is the wasteless spending is the resources spent in the right direction, and out of that, when you aggregate the cost, what is the cost per unit of electricity generated, and even if this is the cost, can you fully recover it, or is a partial recovery only need to be done in terms of affordable pricing? Because there are lots of low income group which can't afford the full cost which can be given to you. So here, the price intervention happens from the government, where you can't get a full recovery of the price from the society. If you see the diagram on the screen, there are 2 types of an affordable pricing strategy. One, there is a direct intervention, and second, there is an indirect intervention. Again, in direct intervention, there can be a cross subsidy or a grant, and in indirect intervention, there can be what is called as a regulated pricing mechanism, where you have a regulator who sets a bandwidth. I'll quickly give you an example of affordable pricing mechanism through the subsidy management, how it is done by an NGO in the remaining 3 minutes for me, so that it will give you a clue as to how this concept operates. On the screen, you find a case study of an NGO operating in South India, which provides eye care. Eye donation Sri Lanka is very famous for. But this is an eye care foundation which goes into the rural areas, tests the patients freely or at most a low cost, brings them for cataract pricing or major cities for any major eye operation, perform the cataract pricing at a price affordable by them as per their income levels. And then it gives them, drops them back home even if it requires kilometers of travel. But here, if you see the yellow box on the right side, how it happens? When you compute the cost using the cost accounting principles issued under the framework similar to that what Mahendra is chairing today in CMA Sri Lanka, using the cost accounting standards, when I compute the cost of computing or operating per cataract in one eye, let's say per operation is rupees X. The real price I can charge is only Y, because it's affordable pricing. I can't put the entire cost per cataract operation on that patient because he can afford the price of only Y. X minus Y is what the gap for this organization. If that organization doesn't get the gap, technology cannot be replaced, they cannot upgrade themselves, nor they cannot in a sustained way continue to price it at Y. So they need this gap. So what do? They first compute this gap. So they will completely know what is the cost per patient of performing one eye operation, which is X, and they will go to the organization and then they will go to their donors. The donors may be Indian residents in USA, in UK or any other country. They will have annual visits, present the cost structure officially computed based on sound cost accounting principles, not a back of the envelope calculation. A sound cost accounting structure giving the cost per operation, then telling this is the price, affordable price, and this is the gap. So you as donors who are willing to pay, please give this way. So this annual budgeting presentation is made to the probable donors using a cost structure, and the gap is funded by these donors by examining the cost structure. So what happens when someone wants, no, I don't want to fund cataract, I want to fund glaucoma operation or a retinopathy operation. What happens in that case? This hospital need to compute not mixing up the cost of retinopathy with glaucoma or cataract. So they will have three service lines. What is the cost of glaucoma operation? What is the cost of cataract operation? And what is the cost of retinopathy? So till now, they were not understanding the cost accounting does this job. Now with this clarity, when cost accounting gets connected with the subsidy management, they know they need to have a very clear cost structure of these three service lines separately, do their calculations, go to the funding agencies, present this separately and get the required subsidy, which is a gap of this X minus Y. This is done by an NGO in India. But if you look at this concept, if you expand it into a government level, this is exactly what UK ministry does, health ministry does for its national health scheme. You may also be, all of you may be aware, the recent change in the government was one of the main reason was the outgoing Prime Minister touched this concept of this NHS and disturbed its funding pattern. And that's why she lost that power and government had to be, a new cabinet had to be brought in. So this NHS scheme is solid foundation is on the cost accounting. All the operations in hospitals throughout NHS, because the government assures the national health for all its citizens, commencing from the highest heart surgery till a very simple ECG, the cost per test is done thoroughly based on cost accounting. The hospitals need to submit a budget to the Ministry of Health. Using the cost accounting principles, this is the budget what we require because the number of patients to be covered is so much. This is the funds we require. This is the current generation and this is the gap. So what I gave you as an example of a eye hospital in India or eye foundation in India, the same concept but happens at a ministry level using the cost accounting principles. So these are all some of the important examples available. I am also winding up with giving you a framework issued by the Australian Northern Territory as to how the pricing framework takes place using the cost accounting principles. So these are all some of the very, very famous examples or the practices available in various parts of the world as to how a good expenditure control system and a good affordable pricing framework can rest on proper cost accounting principles. And now, for the benefit of all of you, we need to understand that the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka has already issued the societal costing, which is the framework for cost and management accounting standards, which contains the societal costing framework speaking on all this. So time has come now for us in our institute that under the leadership of Professor Lakshman Vatawala, we communicate about this framework of societal cost accounting framework to the government, to the relevant decision-making authorities, and ensure that this framework finds the light of the day in a proper expenditure management practices of Sri Lanka coming under the umbrella of the International Monetary Fund, because we have gone to them in the situation of rebuilding our nation. Thanks a lot for the gentlemen for your very patient hearing.
Sorry, we come to our last presenter, Mahendra. I will not take too much time. Mahendra will come and make a presentation on cost accounting framework.
Good afternoon. Actually, when I listened to the two speakers who spoke before me, I must say my heart broke. Because when we listen to these speeches, we realize how much we have lost out as a country and how much we are continuing to lose out as a country. So, the topic for me is the importance of cost, efficiency and productivity in transforming business. Now, first and foremost, we need to understand why cost, efficiency and productivity are important. They are important because we are dealing with scarce resources. Resources are scarce, wants are unlimited, therefore we need to account for resources. That is what accountancy profession is all about. But we learn this most important principle of the need to account for resources in economics, because the resources are scarce. Now, in that sense, when I talk about cost, efficiency and productivity in transforming a business, I would like to define a business to say any activity that is using scarce resources to produce goods and services is a business. For me, any activity that is using scarce resources for production of goods and resources is a business. If we are using scarce resources for that purpose, then we need to account for that cost. We need to be mindful of it, and then we need to drive efficiencies and productivity. Now, the cost is, as you know, in very simple terms, cost is the amount of resources you consume. Then what is efficiency? Efficiency is maximum output with minimum wasted effort or expense. Maximum output with minimum wasted effort or expense. Then the productivity, as you all know, is the rate of input or the rate of output per input. That is productivity. So cost, efficiency and productivity are important because we are using scarce resources for production of goods and services. Now, when we talk about cost, now in our cost and Management Accounting Standard Board, we talk about the costing, the need for costing standards in this country. When we talk about the costing standards, we specifically identify two areas. Those two areas are, one is the managerial costing or managerial cost, which are mostly internal, and then the societal cost that are mostly external. Now, as accountants or as business leaders in this audience, we all focus on driving internal cost efficiencies. We all focus on driving cost efficiencies. As accountants, one of our main areas of focus is minimizing cost, driving cost efficiencies, identifying cost leaders. Make the costing more efficient, make production more efficient, give ideas to production, give ideas to marketing, to make the cost efficient and productive. But have we understood that however much we try to do, the impact we can make on the business is limited? Today's environment is a good example as to how our effort can go waste in managing the efficiency of cost and productivity. Because now we are beginning to realize more than ever before that the cost we can manage can account for only maybe 20% of the total cost of the business. Good 80% of the total cost of the business is external. That is why the companies that were profitable last year are bankrupt today. The companies that were doing well last year are struggling to survive today. Is it because those companies haven't looked at cost? Is it because those companies haven't focused on cost efficiencies or driving efficiencies, improving efficiencies? Is it because those companies haven't looked at productivity improvements? No, it is not because of that. It is because we have not focused enough on cost or managing cost external to us. Now, internal cost in driving internal cost efficiencies, as accountants, we identify cost drivers. We identify big cost drivers in the organization and focus on cost drivers. We identify what is the necessity for these costs, how we can minimize these costs, how we can control these costs. As accountants, we give those ideas. We try to make the company more productive, more efficient, smooth operation. As engineers, what do when it comes to internal cost? They do projects like TPM, Total Productive Maintenance, where they try to achieve zero accidents, zero defects, and zero breakdowns. You try to increase and improve productivity. Then we do 5S, Kaizen, to improve productivity. Then 6 Sigma, to minimize variations. Then we also do lean management to reduce waste. Now, as private sector companies, we do all these things, and what have we achieved? Actually, I was having this conversation in the morning with some of my staff, and in our companies, we have done all this. And we have driven, I feel bad, we have driven our employees crazy. We have driven them nuts. Sometimes they have had sleepless nights doing these projects. But finally, what have we achieved? When we introduce these projects, I always tell employees, look, there is something in it for you. Because employees always ask, when they try to embark on these projects, what is in it for me? I do all this for the company, what do I get? So we promise better incentives, better bonuses, better take-home pay. But I must say that today, in that discussion, I admitted to employees, I am sorry, I have not been able to keep that promise. Because our employees' real income has gone down. They find it difficult to meet ends. They come and ask for salary increases. They come and ask for other concessions, and the companies cannot afford. Is it because the companies haven't focused on these areas? No. It is not because the companies haven't focused on internal costs, but because the companies haven't focused on external costs. So, when it comes to, in my opinion, 80% of a company's cost can be external. It could be electricity, it could be gas, energy, it could be the amount of money spent on education, health through taxpayers' money, ports, aviation, all these costs that are less efficient or inefficient become a burden to the company, to the private sector, because they add to your cost. Now, overnight, the energy prices have doubled. Not in the world market, but because of depreciation of the rupee, due to imprudent management of the economy, our costs are increasing at a rapid pace. Inflation has completely wiped out the real income of our employees. So how do we take care of that? So these are things we need to understand when we look at cost efficiency and productivity. Looking at our own company, looking at our own operation to drive cost, driving our employees to achieve cost efficiencies, productivity is not going to solve the problem. We need to pay adequate attention to how the external costs behave. What we have not done in the past is, now Mr. Raman spoke of how in countries like India, costs are managed by the government. Chief cost officer, how he is responsible, or how he is held responsible to account for costing of major projects. But in countries like Sri Lanka, we have not been able to, even as professional bodies, we have not been able to get these implemented through right lobbying. All this time, as professionals, we thought if we do business, we make money, we live happily. General public used to think, if we work, we make money. And what is happening outside to our operation is external, it's political, and we don't have to worry about it. But today we are beginning to realize that is not the case. Unless the external environment is right, unless we contribute to make that external environment right, there is no environment for the businesses to operate. There is no environment for people to go and work and make a living. And that is exactly what we are experiencing today. So, as professionals, we have a duty not only to look at internal costs or costs that are internal to the company, but also look at costs that are external to the company. And ignoring external cost can wipe out businesses. That is what has happened today. How many companies are closing down every day? How many companies are beginning to struggle to keep their operations alive every day? We as professionals could not foresee this. We as professionals did not contribute to making this external environment better, and we are paying the price today. Now, as professionals, we need to understand, while we understand the behavior of internal costs, we also need to understand the behavior of external costs. External cost, our external environment in countries like Sri Lanka is heavily distorted. I would say heavily distorted by untargeted. I use the word untargeted untargeted subsidies, and ill thought out tax policies. Because what happens is, why it is so relevant to managing cost efficiency and productivity is, when you have distortions in the economy by way of poorly targeted subsidies and poorly implemented tax policies, is that kind of distortions can make uncompetitive businesses, inherently uncompetitive businesses in the country look competitive or appear competitive. The same way, competitive businesses can appear to be uncompetitive because there are distortions in this economy. So we have relied on these distortions to make our businesses profitable. That is why Nadishani spoke about the SOEs. Today, what is happening is SOE transformation is also opposed by corporate sector who build businesses around these inefficient state-owned enterprises. When businesses thrive on the back of inefficient state-owned enterprises, they themselves oppose transformation of state-owned enterprises. That is a key problem. So as professionals, we should create that dialogue, build that conversation, that when these distortions are there, we should have the courage to speak against those distortions, because it not only affects your short-term income, but it also affects your future, the long-term future. So without making that conversation, without building that conversation, without contributing to that conversation, if we are going to ignore that, thinking that it is not for us, it is for somebody else to fix, then we are wrong. So as accountants, we need to understand that. Now Nadishani said, there is no accountability. We have 8,000 accountants in the country and still we are looking for accountable leader. And maybe in the corporate sector, we are still looking for good, accountable corporate leaders who also create this conversation that external cost is important to the survival of businesses. If we ignore this external cost, then we will not be able to manage our internal cost. Now, look at electricity as a societal cost, which is external to us. All this time, we have been depending on subsidized electricity, or maybe the cost of electricity, there is a huge component of inefficient, waste, maybe corruption in the electricity tariff, and we have not been concerned because we got it at a lower rate. Because if we consumed lesser number of units, we were paying a lower rate. But we never cared as to how much the state is incurring. State means people, how much the people of this country are incurring to produce a unit of electricity. When we paid a lower rate, actually the cost of that was borne by a child in a village who doesn't have electricity for studies. When we paid lower price for fuel, it was borne by a mother who would walk miles to fetch water in a remote village. And we, for 30, 40, 50 years, chose to ignore that. So if we continue to ignore that, if we continue to support that ideology, then as professionals, we will not only ignore the importance of properly driving internal cost, but also ignore the need to properly drive the external costs. So I think it is important for us to understand that when we talk about costing, efficiency, productivity, it is not only the internal cost we need to focus on, but also the external cost. So I feel Sri Lanka, that way will go down the history of the world for educated and professionals not playing their due role in creating this enabling environment, where costing took its pride of place. Now, in other countries, as Mr. Raman said, like Australia, like Canada, like India, how much focus is given to costing? That is because there is cost consciousness at the top. If there is no cost consciousness at the top, then people will never understand cost consciousness. If as a managing director of a company, if I am not control conscious, if I am not cost conscious, there is no way my employees are going to understand cost consciousness and control consciousness. So, as professionals giving leadership to people, we should display, we should demonstrate our understanding of the importance of costing, importance of control consciousness, if we were to drive businesses. I think it is one reason why we have failed as a nation to produce world-class businesses. Maybe there are one or two, but as a nation, we haven't produced world-class businesses. We haven't produced world competitive industries. That is because these distortions, as I said earlier, have made uncompetitive industries competitive in the local economy. And also made competitive industries, inherently competitive industries, uncompetitive in the local economy. So there is no way that these companies can grow. So we are stuck in a vicious cycle. So we need to come out of that. If we were to come out of it, professionals have a bigger role to play. I don't think, now say for example, if a company is failing to deliver, there is no point blaming its employees. It's not the employees who are responsible for a company's below par performance. It is the CEO and the board. And maybe the shareholders themselves who appoint these directors. So you have to fix the top, and fixing the top is a responsibility of the shareholders. And we are the shareholders, we are the stakeholders of this country. If we are serious in fixing the external cost, then we need to put in place a proper mechanism that will understand, a proper leadership that will understand cost consciousness, the control consciousness. Without fixing that, however much we try to look at internal cost, to drive internal efficiencies, the businesses will not succeed. I think the current environment is giving you enough examples as to why it cannot be done. Finally, people work hard, employees work hard, they burn midnight oil, but what do they take home? Are their families happy? Are they happy? They are not. That is why a lot of professionals are trying to flee this country today. If I ask you how many of you are planning to leave the country, I am sure a lot of people will put their hands up. So I am not going to ask that question. That is because they think internally this cannot be fixed. But we should begin to believe that internally we can fix it and we shall fix it. So that's why I think even for institute like CMA, maybe CA, it is important for these professional bodies to come forward to create this conversation. Because we owe it to the people who paid for our education to create this conversation. Because we need to give voice to those people who cannot express their ideas. Because they know that there is an inherent problem in the economy. They know that there is an inherent problem in the system. That is why that these cost efficiencies in the economy cannot be driven. And that is why unnecessarily people will have to pay for corruption, waste, inefficiency. And how much money is wasted in this country by diverting resources towards those areas. So as professionals, if we don't create that conversation, if we don't take that responsibility, I think we are done. So I wish to conclude maybe 2 minutes before my time by just saying something in a lighter vein. Departed or dead people, some people say sleep with the eyes open. Why? they watch over us to see whether we are making the same mistake as they made. So at least we need to show the dead people who are sleeping with the eyes open that this time we will not make the same mistake as they did. So you have to take that as an example and make sure that you don't repeat the same mistake. And you are going to correct this, and you are going to take the responsibility for correcting this. And in doing that, you have to make sure that you try and fix this 80% of the cost that is external to the business. And if you don't fix this 80% cost, you will not do business in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahendra. I think we listened to three very important dimensions for this whole equation about fraud, corruption, and how it can lead to better business performance. So with that, I will sort of now invite Ruchira to sort of take through the next session. But if anyone has any questions from our esteemed panel, I think you can raise them now. But maybe given the time, I will ask Ruchira to sort of see how we can wind this up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manil. So I think in the overall program, we are running about 1 hour late. So in the interest of time, I will not take that much of time. I will give my concluding remarks. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Manil, as the session chairman. You have given the perfect platform by explaining the conditions necessary to complete a fraud. I had few doubts, I clarified with you, and you have mentioned in your speech, basically in your opening remarks, that there should be 3 conditions: motive, opportunity, and justification for doing the wrong thing. Then our first speaker, Ms. Nadishani Perra, she was basically talking about the ingredients again connected to fraud, and she has explained beautifully that abuse of power, excessive use of or abusing the power that is given to a particular individual or for a particular position is the root cause of all the frauds that can take place in an organization. And also you have mentioned in your speech various other ingredients such as nepotism that can lead to corruption in our country. The other 2 gentlemen, Mr. Raman and Mr. Mahendra Jayasekara, both are connected in a particular way. Both are members of the Cost and Management Accounting Standards Board of Sri Lanka. Mr. Mahendra Jayasekara is the chairman, and Mr. Raman is an advisor, and he has been advising us all throughout. And Mr. Raman was basically explaining the importance of cost controls by giving examples from various countries. And as we have just listened to Mr. Mahendra Jayasekara, he was explaining the need of societal cost, need of including the societal cost in the cost calculations, because he was explaining about 80% of our costs are societal cost in our total cost. And this cost is something that we cannot see, because in our financial statements we might not account for societal cost, but it is something that we should take into account if we want to truly control the cost. So with those remarks, I would like to conclude this session, since I have explained to you earlier, we are running 1 hour late in the overall program, and I can see other speakers for the next session have turned up. So thank you very much for being with us. So with this, I will conclude the session 3. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruchira. It's interesting we use the term running. Actually, we have stopped running.
So we're going to request Professor Vatavella to come up on stage, not running, and present our thanks to the panelists in a form that they can take away in their hands, not just in their hearts. So we'll begin with the session chairman, Mr. Manil Jayasinghe. Followed by Mr. Ruchira Pereira, the co-chair. Ms. Nadishani Pereira too. And Mr. A.N. Raman, and of course, Mr. Mahendra Jayasekara.